So I'll just say this. My name's Tammy. I work at the BYU store, and I work with Brandon's team at Dragonstill to put this on, specifically Kara, and we appreciate that we have the opportunity to host this. Thank you for coming. If you have an empty seat next to you, we need all the seats. So scoot in or raise your hand so that people can come sit down, because at this point we're being asked not to let anybody else into the room. So anyway, thanks for coming and have fun.
All right, wow. We could have fit in the BYU bookstore, right? We're going to need a bigger ballroom. Awesome. So, is there still music playing? Yeah, who can kill the music? Is this? What's that? Carrie, you want me to sing along? No. So what we're going to do tonight is what I generally do at my signings. We'll start with me speaking at you for a while. I have a little thing, you can ignore it, it's Professor Sanderson being me. I like to talk, it happens. After that, we will do a Q&A. And so just to let you know, please make sure your questions are not spoilery, okay? This he said, even if you think that, you know, it's not that, just try to talk around it, or if it's a spoilerific question, just wait till you come through the line to ask me. So yeah, you would think that everyone here has read the books, but not necessarily. There are lots of people who get dragged here by significant others. We're like, really? This is what we're doing? It's 10 o'clock. So then after the Q&A, I will go through a few little announcements, and then after that, I will do a reading for you. The reading is from The Secret Project on my website. It's something new, so it's not a sequel to something. I know some of you will be sad about that, but it is new and fun and exciting. So what am I going to talk to you about? Well, I'm gonna start with a story, and you're gonna have to indulge me because this is about one of my children. And as a proud father, I like seeing the things my children do. And one day, I came into the room, into the kitchen, and one of my children was sitting there playing, and he didn't see me, and he didn't know I was there. He's just playing by himself. What he had is he had some of this kinetic sand. You know, it's like sand that sticks together, whatever. And he had his little trucks, and he was driving them in them. This is Oliver, who was 3 years old at the time. So he's really little and really cute. This is the problem, they get older and then they're not cute anymore, but you know, he was little, he could, you know, barely talk, and he's playing with his trucks, and he's doing the thing where they're talking to each other, and you're like, oh, he's like, you know, let's go get some ice cream, and then he drives to get some ice cream, and he's having him do all these little things, and he lines them all up in a row afterward, and I just think, oh, he's so cute, he's so precious. And then he says, if you liked this video, please hit subscribe. Please like me on Facebook and leave a comment in the comment section. He literally said this to an empty room, right? I wish I'd been videoing it. It was hilarious. And it kind of struck me at how different his life is than mine was when I was growing up. You know, he has seen people model play on YouTube, which is, he just figures that's how you finish playing, is you say, please like me on Facebook, right? Please subscribe. And you know, it sent me into this kind of spiral of thinking, of being nostalgic, right? Oliver, who's named after James Oliver Rigby, Robert Jordan, was born, 9 days after A Memory of Light came out? In fact, I went on tour for that shortly after he was born. So if you see my wife tonight, she's a saint. Sending your husband on book tour right after you had a baby. And it's kind of interesting to think about how his life is growing up so differently from mine. Like I said, it made me kind of nostalgic. And nostalgia is kind of a big thing right now. I don't know if you guys have noticed. And so, of course, being me, I started thinking about the nature of nostalgia, right? Like, why am I nostalgic? I think of, like, for instance, I started writing books like 20 years ago, right? And during some of those early days, trying to break in, my life was miserable. In some ways, right? You don't know, I didn't know if I was going to get published. I didn't know if I was going to sell a book. What we would do is I would go to conventions with my friends, Dan Wells and Peter Ahlstrom. And we spent many years going to these conventions, trying to break in. And we would look for editors who were at the science fiction conventions, who were there. And we would try to pitch books to them. And they would get this look in their eyes, right? Like the deer in the headlights when they saw aspiring authors coming up to them, and they would like look to hide behind the planters. I mean, they're there on one hand to be science fiction editors, on the other hand they get a little tired of people pitching books at them. And so what we actually learned to do, we called it petering people. For those who don't know, Peter is my editorial assistant now, and he's worked with me for many years. He wanted to be an editor. And what we would do is, Dan and I wanted to be writers. And so we learned that if you found an editor and you said to them, hey, our friend wants to be an editor, instead of running and hiding, they would immediately go, oh, you poor, poor boy. They would put their arm around it and be like, oh, it's so miserable. Let's talk about having to live in New York and all these authors who will ignore all the great advice you give them. And they would just open up and they would talk to Peter and they would be like, oh, you should do this and this. And they'd look at us and they'd be like, oh, and you guys want to be editors too? And we're like, no, we're writers. And hold up our manuscripts. Right? But then they're trapped in a conversation with us already. It works so well. We would go to these conventions, and we'd all have to share a room. So like we're either sleeping on the floor, or there's like 6 of us in a bed or whatever. Ethan Scarstead went to some of those with me. He's here tonight. I don't know where he is, but he's Scar from Bridge 4. Oh, he's right over there. There's Scar. Say hi, Scar. If you want to know what Scar looks like, that's Scar except Alephi. So yeah, he took me to he went on the very first one with me to New York, where I'll say they were really accommodating on Manhattan. They stole our umbrellas. Really made us feel like we got the true Manhattan experience, right, Scar? We would go to these things and we'd like cram into these little rooms, and we'd watch terrible movies all night. Afterward, and it's weird. I look back at those days, and I'm nostalgic for them. Why do I miss those days, right? Why, like, I'm going to tell you guys, I would much rather come and have 3,000 people in a room, 3,000 people, waiting to see me, than to be wondering if I'm ever going to sell a book, and if I'm going to have to keep working a graveyard shift at a hotel for the rest of my life to support this writing addiction of mine. But So why am I nostalgic, right? Like why? But I think on one hand it's just kind of human nature. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. One of my favorite philosophers, this will tie in, I promise, kind of the way I tie things in, is Heraclitus, right? The philosopher said everything flows. He said, you may know that philosophy better is you can never step in the same river twice. That wasn't Pocahontas, that was Heraclitus. Well, it was Pocahontas too, but this idea that everything has to change, and everything must change, is kind of like a theme in our lives. It's how things work. In fact, this is part of why, looking at things changing in my life, that when I started the Stormlight Archive, I built the very first magic system for it, which was soul casting. It was called Soul Forging back then, by the way, and then I read a really great book series where people were forging souls. It was the Robin Hood books. I'm like, forging's been used too much. But it was the first magic system I built for this series because the theme of the series was going to be transformation. It was people changing from one thing into another, and the idea of kind of a classical, alchemical, you can change one element into another using the magic was really interesting to me. I've talked about before, I love that era, which, by the way, that era in science, that era in time which we often refer to as the Renaissance, when alchemy got big, was also like the biggest nostalgic trip that's ever happened in history, right? They were nostalgic for Greek philosophers, which obviously I am too, because I just quoted one. But this idea, alchemy being this big thing during the Renaissance, where they're like, we think that if we just apply science to everything that people have been superstitious about in the past, we can make it work. And spoiler, they couldn't, but the fact that they tried has always been really, really, really interesting to me. And so you guys get the trial run on the speech. By the time I get through my 20th time on this, I won't need this, but you know, you guys get to be the guinea pigs. Yeah, you like that. You guys can clap for anything. You're awesome. Really, we're just wasting time till I can give you your books at 10 o'clock, but we won't say that. By the way, nice that we got to move to 10 o'clock, right? We figure it's midnight in New York, so that counts as a midnight release, right? We'll just change a little bit, and then my children can come and bother people. So, soul casting, this idea of transformation, the way I started the Stormlight Archive, the very first things that I wrote down specifically for the book were these ideas that I was going to come up with 10 elements that were not your classical Greek elements, and I was going to build a magic system. Basically, originally, one of the ideas was for all the Knights Radiant to each be able to soul cast one element into something. I moved away from that through revisions and things like that, but that was the original concept. So that thing that's in the front of the first book, the Double Eye of the Almighty, the little map thing, it's the first thing I came up with. I did it myself. Poor Isaac, he eventually had to try and interpret this and make it look good. But I did it in MS Paint. I did it in MS Paint with the whole concept of transformation as a theme. Now, I've said before that Dalinar is actually the oldest piece of the Stormlight Archive. He started in the Dragonsteel books. And I pulled him out when I started building Stormlight. But the first original thing for the series I wrote down was this idea of soul casting, this idea of transformation. And the idea that, you know, things change. Everything changes. You can't step in the same river twice. That philosophy was because the river is always changing. Water is always wearing away those banks. That river won't be there the next minute. It will be a different river that happens to be in the same place. And while I was working on this book, actually, I was drawing that out. I went to World Fantasy Convention in Montreal, I think it was. Yeah. And we had gotten really good at petering people. We were really good at it, and we had also gotten really good at stalking editors. Like, we would go to people we know. Oh, yes. Some mood lighting. We would go to people we knew who would say, okay, who are the new editors who are hungry for new authors, who haven't bought a lot of books yet, but are looking to buy books, and they'd say, oh, you should go find this person. And at this convention, someone said, oh, you should go find Moshe Fader. This was 2001, wasn't it, Peter? Or maybe 2000. 2001. So it's 2001, and we heard this name, Moshe Fader. You need to find Moshe Fader. And I got to tell you, Dan Wells is really, really good at stalking people. In fact, when he eventually started writing books about serial killers, we're all like, yeah. And we spent this whole convention looking for this guy, Moshe Fader, and eventually we found him at a party. Was it you who found him, Peter? It was Dan. It was Dan. Yeah, I mean the stalker. I didn't say that. No, I sponged that from the record. The very nice man who would never stalk anyone found Moshe. Dan came and got me. I remember at that party. He's like, I found him. And grabbed me, and we went over and we chatted with Moshe for like an hour and a half, which mostly because Moshe likes to talk was us nodding and him telling us about stuff. And this is the guy who eventually bought launchers from me, and I'm not a serial killer, from Dan. And so it really worked out finding Moshe. It was a really fun experience. Like I said, I'm nostalgic for these days, as terrible as they were. After we talked to Moshe, it was like 1 a.m., and we are just hyped because we'd spent this whole convention hunting for this guy. And we decided that we would go celebrate by getting food, but it was 1 a.m. So we just kind of walked down the street, down from the hotel. I think we'd gone this place once before. We found it open. It was an Italian place. There was nobody else in there. There's nobody else ever in there. In fact, there was just a guy who always spent the whole time we were there on the phone in the back, kind of yelling in Italian. So we don't know what was up there. We won't make any judgment calls. But we went there, and the bookie was there, and he... I didn't say that either. We got our food. We were ordering, but Peter had trouble ordering. Peter was not in the mood for Italian food. He didn't want it. He was delaying. He's like, I don't know. And the guy who walks up, he's like, what do you want? I can make you whatever you want. And Peter's like, I want Chinese food. And the guy said, done. I'll make you some Chinese spaghetti. And he ran in the back. He took Peter's menu. He didn't let him say a thing, or some Chinese spaghetti. He just ran in the back. And he came out a little while later with spaghetti that had been stir-fried. With some Chinese sauce. It was good, right, Peter? It was doenjang sauce, wasn't it? We decided Korean sauce. So it was really Korean spaghetti. But we will forgive him. And he made this Chinese spaghetti. And ever since then we've talked about this idea of Chinese spaghetti that was made for Peter. And this does relate, by the way. Does relate. This is the sort of stuff that's going through my head before a book comes out. What am I thinking about? I'm thinking about Chinese spaghetti and how it relates to Heraclitus is what I'm thinking about. Because my actual most favorite quote from Heraclitus, and I'm going to read it to you because I get it wrong all the time, is, all things come into being, I guess I'm not going to read it. All things come into being through the conflict of opposites. That's a really interesting thought. I've always loved that. Everything exists because opposites are in conflict with one another. And this is kind of a writing principle. Because I feel like lots of great books, what they do is they mash up this idea of something brand new and something familiar. All books are like a mashup of your influences versus reacting toward them and reacting against them at the same time. There's this weird tension in fiction. It's like you want to do something new, but you can only use what you've seen before. And so it's like this constant war between nostalgia and originality that makes fiction happen, at least for me. If you look at the Stormlight books, it's me saying, wow, I love big epic fantasies like The Wheel of Time. Absolutely love them. I want to do something like that. But I don't want to do something like that because that's been done. At the same time, feeling these two emotions together, this war between the past and the future, constantly exists inside of me, and that's where the stories come from. That's where Roshar came from. I'm going to do a big epic fantasy, but I want to do a world like has never been in an epic fantasy before. And that's where the storm came from, because this idea of things getting birthed out of conflict is so fascinating to me. Every major world religion has change as an aspect of it. This idea that what you are now is not what you will eventually be. You will become something more, either through kind of Buddhist or Hindu beliefs where you're looking inwardly toward perfection, or you're looking outwardly in something like a more Judeo-Christian religion for a source of inspiration or a source of change. We believe that change is how we become what we want to be. And in fact, it's a scientific principle as well. The whole idea is that that change over time is essential to how a species will continue to exist, right? Then those changes aren't always good. That's the part that we kind of ignore when we're talking about things like natural selection. Is like some of those are terrible changes. A mutation happens and the whole line dies off. But some of those changes are good, and then they stick. So I think it's both kind of a secular and a spiritual idea that without change, we wouldn't be here. And change is the method by which we are going to become better. And if things could never change, then it would be terrible. In fact, if you look at the mythos of science fiction and fantasy, a lot of the time, the villain is the person who wants to become immortal and never be forced to change again. This is what Lord Voldemort wanted, right? To never have to change. To always be able to remain the same. This is the whole origin of the vampire mythos. Is this idea that there's a dark side to never being forced to change. So what is the point of all of this? Where am I going? Well, it's this nostalgia idea, which I'm not as down on it. Everyone's like, oh, nostalgia, terrible, terrible, terrible. Why is everyone only going to movies about nostalgia? I'm not there. I think nostalgia is good for us, but I feel like the looking backward, the point is, and if I have a summation and a theme for this speech, it is that looking backward, the point of it is to see where we are now and to recognize how far we've come. So let's use nostalgia, let's use looking backward as a contrast to looking forward, and let that change make us better. And if you like this, please hit subscribe. Like me on Facebook. Go to my Insta face or whatever that is, yeah. So let's go ahead and by the way, is Oliver here? Did he run off? He ran off. They cannot be contained, the children. One room is not large enough for them. But if you see the smallest of the three running around, that's who that is. Let's go ahead and do a Q&A, like I said. And there's a lot of you. I'm not going to be able to get to all your questions. I'm not even going to try. Ooh, that evil. Yeah. Don't worry, I'll repeat the questions. I'm really good at this. Oh wait, this is a big room. Yeah, you better run it back. You better, I'll step to this side. I'll repeat the questions also, but let's go ahead and I'll let Adam just start picking people and giving them, yeah.
Could a listener be a squire?
Could a listener be a squire? Yes, that is a RAFO. Joel, hold up your RAFO button and you think, oh, there's my son. He's the RAFO master. Come on up, Joel. You get a hold up RAFO when we say it. So if you don't know what RAFO means, it means read and find out. It was one of Robert Jordan's favorite phrases. And Joel is my RAFO assistant tonight. All right, I'm going to check the time, make sure okay. We're going to go to like 9:30 with the Q&A, and then we'll get to the reading. Okay, go ahead.
How would a Mr. Wraith bond with a Spren? Would he use a gem heart, O's, or songs like the listeners?
All right, next question. Where do gemstones come from? Gemstones on Roshar are mostly coming from gem hearts. And I remember just sticking at some mentions of this in Oathbringer because a lot of people have been asking about this. It's just not something like the daily ranching of animals for their gem hearts is not something that we bring up a lot. But there is some limited mining operations on Roshar as well. You just got to get through the creme. Yeah, all right.
If someone is attacked by a hemalurgist, could they be healed with regrowth?
Oh boy. So if they were attacked by a hemalurgist, then yes. If hemalurgy were done to them, then it's a much more difficult thing, and that's going to depend on a lot of factors. So, yeah. All right.
Where did you get the idea of a chasm fiend?
Idea for Chasm Fiend. This is actually a pretty good one. Because, so what was happening with the Stormlight books is originally the Shattered Plains were not in Stormlight, if you didn't know about this. If you didn't know about this, Stormlight started without the Shattered Plains. And when I came back to the series to write it after kind of failing at that 2002 version and wanting to try again, I hired a concept artist to do sketches of characters and settings for me. His name was Ben McSweeney. He's actually here. Yeah. I think, is Ben sitting at his table still? He's probably sitting at his table. He's back in the back? Oh. Maybe, I don't know. Ben is here, but Ben is the person I eventually hired to do a lot of the artwork because he had done all this great concept art. And one of the things he did is he drew a giant brain coral. Because I'd said, give me corals on things that you would normally find underwater in a coral reef, but above ground. This is where we're going to start our brainstorming. And he did this giant one that people were walking through the cracks, and there was a little crustacean monster in there. And I'm like, oh, that looks like the Shattered Plains. Hey, the Shattered Plains, why didn't I think of that? They work really well, because they'd originally been in Dragonsteel, and they hadn't really worked there. And so I brought the Shattered Plains over, and the original inspiration for a chasm fiend was that little beastie. It looked more like a crayfish that he had stuck in one of these little grooves. We should find that art and post it online so you guys can see it. But that's where chasm fiends came from.
Do you plan to write any more books in the Steelheart universe?
Okay, so more books in the Steelheart universe. Do you want to stand up here? Do you want to sit down? You're cool either way. Yeah, you're good. Okay. So Steelheart. So there's a big story here. So the book I started writing right after I finished Oathbringer in June was called The Apocalypse Garden. And this is in the same universe as The Reckoners. And I wrote the whole book, and there were some things wrong with it, as happens sometimes with books. And so I thought, I'll send it to my editor and see what my editor at Random House thinks. She read it, she got back, she's like, I like some things about it, but it's got these problems. I'm like, well, those are the same problems I thought it had. That's not a good sign. So I got on, I brainstormed and said, what do you think we should do? She's like, well, maybe this and this. And so I spent like 2 weeks working on a really in-depth revision document. And I revised about like 20% of the book following this document, and it was worse. It didn't fix the problem. And so I'm like, I need more time on this book. This book is not working. I'm sure I can fix it eventually. Like I told you, I stopped writing the Stormlight Archive in 2002. And so I pulled that book and set it aside. And I sent it to Dan Wells, actually, because he's one of the best writers I know. I'm like, Dan, something's broken. Can you tell me what's broken? And so I'm waiting to see what Dan has to say on that. But for now, that's where Secret Project came from. So I'm like, well, I don't feel good releasing Apocalypse Guard next year. I have to fix it first. It's just not good enough. And so I pulled out an outline for something else, which I'll read to you later. And I said, well, I'm going to write this right now, because I feel like I could write this. And it's going to work. So I started writing that. So the answer is yes, there will be more books. And there will even be, if I get around to it, a book about Mizzy. as a protagonist, if I can find, like, I have to get the Apocalypse Guard working first. All right.
Right back here. A lot of people probably ask you how to write better. Do you have the advice for people who want to read better?
Oh, what an interesting question. So, I don't know if you could read the wrong way. Right upside down if it works for you, man. One of my speeches previous year, the little things I get up that where I go professor on you. One of those things was where I talked about there is no wrong way to read my books, and you have the power as a reader, I feel, to have like line item veto. If I describe a certain person a certain way and you're like, you are allowed to change that in your version of the book. I have a good friend, he's still in my writing group, actually he's Leighton from Bridgeport, right? Leighton from Bridgeport, because all my friends ended up in Bridgeport, except for Dan, who I killed horribly in the Mistborn books. It was great. He survived the first time. He did. I let him survive, and then he died. All of my friends ended up in Bridgeport. So Leighton, he was reading The Wheel of Time back when he was a teenager, and he said, they got to the part where Tom Maryland has a mustache. If you read these books, he's the guy that has this really awesome mustache. And Alan said, no mustache. He doesn't match mine. Like, when he told me this, I was horrified. I'm like, that is like a central feature of what Tom Maryland looks like. He has a big drooping mustache. And Alan's like, nope, not in my version. And I'm okay with that when you do that in my book. You can pronounce the names the way you want. You can, I give you a script and then you direct it. And you get to change whatever you want in your head. So I don't know if there's a right or a wrong way to read, if that makes sense. I did take a speed reading class for like 3 days, or maybe no, just like 1 day, where they started teaching me how to speed read, and I realized when I was speed reading, I was missing kind of the music of the writing for me. Like one of the tactics of speed read is to stop hearing it in your head, the sounds while you're reading, which is great for getting through something fast, but I was like, no, this doesn't work. It makes the books less musical, if that makes any sense. And so I immediately dropped out of that class. But that was for me, right? I need to savor the story a little bit more. If you want to speed read it and that works for you, go. So it's an interesting question that I just basically refused to answer. I'm sorry. All right, let's do this. And then Adam, why don't you come up and kind of work your way over this way?
Working? There we go. Started reading Wheel of Time in 1991, so thanks for completing that part of my life. My question is, by and large, I love your characters. I really dislike Eshni. Really dislike her. Is there a character that you really dislike writing, or if you don't dislike them, is it hard to find their voice?
Cat Swain. Cat Swain, you're not my real mom. Maureen is my real mom. I tried to do my best with Cat Swain that I could. Though I would say, of my own characters, they're all like my children, and I love my children all equally. So, I the same thing with my characters. Like, when I'm writing someone, they're my favorite. So, yeah. I wouldn't say so, but on the Wheel of Time, definitely. Cat Swain, she can go eat a brick.
With reading, have you ever read a book that has made you cry? Or has made you so frustrated that you wanted to throw the book?
Books that made me want to cry, and books that made me want to throw the book. Wow. It's not that hard to make me emotional in a book. I'm normally a very even-keeled guy, but a really great story told really well can really get to me. It's part of why I wanted to be a writer. I've got like I said, a very even temperament. I wake up most days just kind of feeling the same that I did the day before. So if there's like, bipolar or things like this, I'm like the opposite. I'm like, if you vary between, like, people vary between like a 0 and a 100, I'm like at a 75. all the time, which can be really cool. Except when everyone else is like super excited, and they all go to like 90 and 100. I'm like, yay, that's cool. I'm happy too. But a good story, that gets me, right? That can really get me. And so, I mean, a lot of my favorite stories. Anne McCaffrey was really good at doing this for me. Anne McCaffrey. But Terry Pratchett, right? They're comedies. They make me cry, right? And so, yeah, like, if I mention something that I like something, it's probably stirred powerful emotions in me. What have I wanted to throw across the room? Okay, I'm sorry, I know that some of you really like this, and I'm sure they are really good books if you're in the right mindset, but this is going to date me a little. There was a sequel series to the Willow movie that was written, and Chris Claremont is a great writer, right? This is like, I think this is the X-Men Chris Claremont, right? And things like this. I don't blame Chris. Lucas was involved. So that, strike that from the record. But I loved Willow, right? When I was a kid, I'm like, a fantasy movie that doesn't suck. Yes! Right? Nothing against a Beastmaster, but, you know, a fantasy movie that doesn't suck, and Warwick Davis was awesome. I love that movie. And then the books came out, and like in the first one, they're like, yeah, all those people you love, they're dead. That's how the prologue goes, right? And the character whose life they saved is in the movie and things like that. Spoilers, it's been like 30 years. It's like a spoiled brat, and everyone's personality changed. That's probably the book that I most throw against the wall-ish. I'm like, no, don't kill all my favorite characters. Here's a clue for you. If people love a whole bunch of stuff, don't start the sequel with, yeah, all that stuff you loved. We're just gonna, yeah, we're not gonna, don't Aliens 3 your movie, okay? Don't get Alien 3. Don't do that to your books. Okay, it's okay to have loss, but don't have all the people you love die in between stories. Bad idea. All right, yeah.
At the end of Words of Radiance, Hoyt is sitting there talking to some gremlins, and I was wondering, is he talking to one of the Desian avians?
Alright, so have the heralds lost connection and identity, and if so, can regrowth heal it?
The question was if the heralds lost connection and identity, and if so, can regrowth heal it? Alright. Awesome. Soulcast Blood, does it have RH factor, blood type, or does it match anyone's DNA? So the answers are to that, yes.
So Hoyt was not afraid of a shard blade. Would he be afraid of Nightblood?
Every rational person who has ever existed in the Cosmere is afraid of Nightblood, or should be. Hoyt isn't always rational, but yes, he is afraid of Nightblood.
Are you worried, because of the length of the Stormlight Archive books, that the movies will not be able to encompass them fully?
Well stated way to put that. So let's talk movies for a second, so that I can save you some time when you're coming through the line, in case you're curious. And then I'll hit the two big ones. I'll hit movies and I'll hit sequels to my books. So movies. Hollywood. Bless them, they try. No, seriously, like, there are a lot of really creative people who really are passionate about books in Hollywood. Just none of them have any money. I'm exaggerating, strike that from the record. But no, we have sold the rights to people that we trust. Otherwise, we wouldn't sell them. It's always a gamble. You're never sure if it's going to work. Like even people who are really well-intentioned. The Golden Compass movie is a great example of this. Really good intentions. Everything about that movie should have worked. Great actors, great design, and the movie was boring. And it's like everybody tried really hard and it just didn't work. And sometimes I know how that feels. I tried really hard on Apocalypse Guard and it didn't work. And so yes, I'm totally worried about that. But the thing about it is, if I don't risk that, then I can't ever have a good movie because I will never have a movie. Now, would we rather Stormlight be a television show? Probably. And I think the chances, So, what I've been saying is, let's just hope that the other fantasy television shows do well. Let's hope that the new Lord of the Rings one does really well. Let's hope that Pat's Rothfuss's television show goes really, really well. Like, if a bunch of these things get made and they're good, it improves our chances and things like that. I've constantly said I would rather a television show, but you know, I wouldn't have thought that the Lord of the Rings films could be adapted as well as they were, and they weren't. So who knows? I'm willing to roll those dice and see what we end up with. All right, Adam, let's do 2 more.
I was just wondering, why do you decide to do more series like Apocalypse Guard or your secret project while you still have so many more unfinished sequels?
Yeah, it's a good question. No, it is totally legit. Yeah. There's multiple people holding up for this. So I did finish Legion. I did that. So those who are looking for that one will come out next year. Why do I do it this way? Well, most of the time it's because I tried a book and it doesn't work. Arithmetist fans will probably know I tried to write Arithmetist too. I built an outline, I started writing it, and the book didn't work. The route line was wrong on that one. I got like 3 chapters in, I'm like, nope, this book is broken. And it was mostly due to my lack of research into the proper things to do the book the right way. And because Arithmetist and Alcatraz, which we'll get Alcatraz 6 eventually, those are the 2 that are looming most. Those are side projects. Those are things that I do for fun. They have to slot in between my main projects, if that makes any sense. Like, I have to do them when there's time from other projects. So, for instance, I couldn't go to Random House and say, I'm going to do Arithmetist 2 sequel, because Arithmetist is not their series. It belongs to Tor. And so, if I want to do more with Random House, I have to do something that works for them. And that's kind of the long and short of it. I mean, I will get around to things like Warbreaker and Elantra sequels, but the thing about those is, those are sequels to the worlds, not necessarily sequels to the characters. You can't, I won't promise you that the same characters will appear in them, some of them will. But it's the idea that those are standalone books that I plan to do more in the world, and the time isn't right in the Cosmere to do those. For something like Arithmetist, that's more pressing, because I'm like, that promises a sequel with the same characters. But I have to find out how to write it first. And for various reasons, a Arithmetist sequel is really tricky to pull off. So yeah. So that's kind of the answer to it. Sometimes I also just need a break and to be able to do whatever my mind wants to do. Yeah, it's not a very satisfying answer, but it is the way my brain works. But you can know that if it's like one of the mainline things that I've got contracts for, that I won't be doing that to you on it. So Stormlight will be pretty regular, Mistborn will be pretty regular, but some of the side projects, it's just when it's right, it's right. All right, last question.
So, in Secret History, Fuzz mentions a weapon that he buried. Is that the ATM, or is that something else?
Go ahead, Joel. Yeah, so.
Hello? Okay.
Hey.
Hey, so okay, in correlation to art, okay, Leonardo da Vinci has the Mona Lisa, Michelangelo has the Sistine Chapel. Do you feel that you created your Mona Lisa, or is that something you're still working on?
Oh boy. Number one, I do not belong mentioned in the same breath. Let's establish that. I actually got to see the Sistine Chapel last year, and wow. You think you know it because you've seen the pictures. It's not the same. Have I? That's not for me to decide. That is actually for readers and history to decide. Most entertainment is ephemeral. Most of what we release will go out there. It'll make people's lives better, I hope. It'll be fun. We will all like it, but then it vanishes and a new generation of artists create new things for that generation. And that's fine, right? I'm not chasing Voldemort's immortality in that way, but maybe I'll create a Dune, right? Or an Ender's Game, or something that is larger than the author by orders of magnitude and becomes an enduring part of the pop cultural landscape. Maybe, but that's not the sort of thing I think you can set out to do. It's like a combination of all kinds of factors come into these things hitting at the right time and working in the way that certain films and books do, like Harry Potter did. Ask me that in 100 years, and we'll see. It's a good question to think about, but it's not a good question for me necessarily to answer for myself. If that makes sense. All right, guys.